Hello, everyone, and welcome to Candid Conversations. I am Heather Aliano. I'm the Communications Director at the One America Movement. We do Candid Conversations every Friday to bring people in from across our network and across the country to talk about issues of importance. We know that right now is a really stressful time for a lot of people, and we like to remind everyone that we are not nearly as divided as we think we are, and we have so much more in common than we think we do. So this series of videos is designed to talk about big and important issues so we can understand each other a little better and we can figure out ways to work together to make this country a better place. So today we have with us Chris Crawford from the Democracy Fund. He is a Senior Program Associate for Constructive Politics at the Democracy Fund, which is an independent foundation working to ensure that our political system is able to withstand new challenges and deliver on its promise to the American people. In that role, he manages the Faith and Democracy Portfolio, which is a collection of faith-based initiatives that empower religious leaders in their communities to promote pluralism and strengthen our democracy. So this work is really important. It's right in line with what we do here at One America. So what they're doing is they're developing a constructive politics strategy to explore what unites us while helping governing institutions become more diverse, more inclusive, and better serve all Americans. And it's very important to note that Chris holds a degree in political science from the George Washington University. I also went to GW, so we're representing there. And he's currently pursuing an executive master's in nonprofit administration from Notre Dame. So welcome, Chris. We're glad you could be here.
Thank you very much, Heather. I'm glad to be here.
It's a really, really busy time for those of us who are working anything having to do with election. I've got a lot of friends who are working campaigns or staffing these things, and things can get really, really stressful in these last couple of weeks. But it can also be a lot of fun. So I'm wondering, how are things in your network? How's it going over there?
It's been interesting. I've felt really blessed this time around because I used to be very involved in electoral politics. It used to be my job, and I don't really feel at home in either political party anymore. And so I actually usually get sad in the lead up to the election because I miss knocking on doors, making phone calls, doing sign waves. But I've been able to, with my work at Democracy Fund and helping the National Task Force on Election Crises, really focus on helping to ensure a smoothly run, safe, trusted election and to help faith leaders in their efforts to support that. And so I felt more useful in the lead up to the election this time and more in the campaign mode. It feels good to not be sleeping as much, eating horribly, and all the good stuff that comes with preparing for a contentious election.
Isn't that true? I mean, yeah, knocking on voters' doors is my absolute favorite thing about politics, is getting to talk to people face to face and having these important conversations about issues more than anything else. But you're right, it's hard. And this year, it's a lot more fun to be having kind of a higher level positive role to play in this.
Right.
So I rushed through your Democracy Fund bit. Can you tell us a little bit about what they do and what your role is there?
Sure, absolutely. Like you said, we can start with what Democracy Fund is. And we are a nonpartisan private foundation based in Washington, D.C., focused on confronting deep-rooted challenges in American democracy while defending against new threats. That's updated language, so I'm excited to be able to share it. In 2015, when I joined Democracy Fund, I was, I think, the 15th or 16th person hired, and now we have over 70 people on staff. So it's been really incredible watching the organization grow, as well as I think we've watched the need for a democracy fund focused on American democracy. That need has grown at the same time. So it's been a really interesting time to be working at an organization like Democracy Fund. Specifically, our constructive politics work focuses on supporting more inclusive policymaking at all levels of government. And that's where the Faith and Democracy portfolio sits within Democracy Fund, where we try to work with faith leaders in their efforts to promote pluralism, build bridges, and strengthen our democracy. And this, by the way, is where One America Movement's grant from Democracy Fund sits. What we try to do in this portfolio is help faith leaders as leaders in their communities in a way that they can promote pluralism and common good through their faith tradition. And what we've learned is that it's important to create space for people to really bring their deeply held beliefs and values, their faith-based values, into these public conversations, into these decision-making processes. We can't build bridges or build these multi-faith or interfaith coalitions if we're telling everyone check your values at the door, water everything down in order to have a seat at this table. We need to be able to bring everybody's point of views in. Excuse me. And Andrew Hanauer is like the biggest champion for that and one of the best examples of that. So we're very appreciative for that work. And I think it's also important as a non-religious foundation that we're trying to meet religious leaders where they are, help them use their framework, help them use their credible language, find people who want to do this work. It's important that as funders, we're not coming in saying, all right, faith leaders, you have to get on board with our agenda. We're trying to find people who want this type of support, want these networks, toolkits, and things like that. So it's been really a blessing that Democracy Fund has taken that approach and I've been able to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. That's one of the things that makes what we do here at One America so effective is that we allow people to bring their full selves into our programs and their full selves into the work that we do. Like you said, you can't check your values at your door. This is who you are. And some of these values are very, very sacredly held. So figuring out how we can work together and talk to each other, even when we have disagreements or have different value sets, is so important. And we found when you get people in the room, we're able to find those common ground and be able to work together. It's really wonderful. So prior to working at the Democracy Fund, you led a Get Up the Vote operation that made over 1 million live voter contacts. Super exciting, across 4 states. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, how do you reach so many people?
Sure. And it's kind of funny as I was thinking about this question, it's funny thinking about it, looking back at, this was in 2014, because I think the efforts have gotten so much larger where I was working. So in the 2014 midterm election, I was working for the super PAC affiliated with Susan B. Anthony List, which is the nation's largest pro-life political organization. And at that time, it was the biggest field operation the pro-life movement had ever had. But I think this year, SBA List is spending about twice as much money and has expanded well beyond what we did at that time. So in that campaign, I was the assistant national field director. My boss always called me the assistant to the national field director, which looking back was probably more accurate. But what we did is we hired canvassers in North Carolina, Arkansas, and Louisiana to knock on doors of low propensity pro-life voters, trying to get people to the polls that were with us on the issue that might not have been paying attention in a midterm election. And then we added a 4th state in Kansas, when Kansas in that election tightened up late in the race, because if I'm remembering correctly, the Democratic candidate dropped out and the independent candidate was rising in the polls. So in October, the polls were just about tied. And so I was told, fly to Kansas, help build this field operation. We don't know when you're coming back, and stayed pretty much the whole month of October in Kansas. And it was a weird setup compared to some other field operations, because I made every single walk book for all of these different locations, and they had to constantly be updated. So those were 20-hour work days at the end of that. But I loved going around to these states, getting to meet people in those states, learn a lot about their communities. Especially liked seeing, being able to be welcomed into people's homes and meet their families. And I learned a lot about what drives people in politics, and saw a lot of people who care about our politics and care about each other and issues that they think are important. And it also showed me, there were a lot of things showing the deep divisions that we have as well, and how much ideology and partisanship drives things. And one example that I always tell people is I would work from Panera's throughout Kansas because they had Wi-Fi. I could get breakfast and lunch, but also because I could eavesdrop on what people were saying about the election. And if I remember, I might get this wrong, what I overheard, but there was a woman who was talking about Greg Orman, who was the independent candidate. And she was saying to the person with her, I know Greg Orman really well. He was very close with my sister. I wanted my sister to marry him. He's just an excellent guy. And the person she was talking to said, oh, so you're voting for him? She said, oh, no, he's a liberal. I'm not voting for a liberal. And that was the moment where I thought, okay, I think we're going to be okay in the election. This is where Kansas is right now. So it was really interesting.
It's so funny what you can figure out from listening in at Panera and McDonald's and the like. You said something really interesting when you were talking about this experience, that you were targeting low propensity voters. And for people who aren't as wonky as maybe you or I, these are people who probably have beliefs, they have opinions, but they might not be likely to vote, or they haven't voted in a few of the past elections. So when you reach out and you target this group of voters, what is it that encourages them to go out to vote? And what is it that might just stop them from voting prior?
It depends person by person, but the idea in building the sort of voter universe of who we were trying to reach was that these are people, the details of the data that the political organizations have is unbelievable. How much they can micro-target what people's beliefs are based on a variety of factors. So the idea here was finding people who we could tell with a certain level of certainty were conservative and were pro-life, but also in their voting history, they didn't usually vote in midterm elections. And so the idea was to remind them to vote, but also SBA list efforts have been really focused on meeting people at the door, having a face-to-face conversation. So these were pro-life voters who would care about the issue if it was brought to them. And so that's the whole idea of the in-person organizing, is you have a conversation about an issue that the person cares about and try to motivate them to vote. And then also, however they answer the survey, they're now in your database to follow up for get out the vote as well. So it's also identifying your people to get out. And there was another interesting thing at the end of that in my own sort of personal journey, which was that I still strongly am pro-life. And by the way, Democracy Fund does not have a stance on any of these issues. I'm talking about me here. But I'm still strongly pro-life. But late in that, what happened when it was time to govern is I realized that I really didn't fit within either political party anymore. And over the course of that next year, watching some of the senators that we had helped to elect, I was very happy with some of their votes. But at least half the time I wasn't happy with what they were saying or what they were doing. And so it was after that election that I realized I care a lot about this issue, but the way I work professionally and engage in politics is going to be a little bit different in the future, where I couldn't work in electoral politics anymore. So I wanted to share that as well as I think an interesting addendum to the field work.
No, it is really interesting to sit and to look at these candidates and these people we have in office and to picture them as whole people as well. Like everybody's got different beliefs and their values and the way that they vote. So having that bigger picture instead of just what you see on the mailer or what you see on the news, taking the chance to get to know people is so important. And you mentioned that also, like at the tours, it's forming that relationship and having that conversation that really moves people. One of the things that I always thought was fascinating about fieldwork was the importance of that like relational encouragement to vote. Like if I go home to my family and I talk to them about the issues and I suggest that they vote, that's so much more powerful than hearing that we should vote through the news. So for those of us who are really excited about the democratic process, like maintaining those relationships and having that outreach is so important during the season.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, I've gotten all out of order for all of you guys watching and Facebook and social media. We always prepare questions in advance so we can talk them through. And this is very exciting. So I've gotten all out of order on Chris. So I do want to rewind in a minute. But first, I wanted to ask you one more question specifically about voting and voting this year. Why is it so important that we get people out to vote? Why is voting important at all?
I think that's a really important question. And I think it's especially important for people who don't feel at home in either political party. I think there's often a tendency and a temptation to say, well, I don't like either party. They're both imperfect. Some people might even say they're both bad. And so as a result, I don't want a part of any of this. And I'm going to disengage, turn off the TV, not vote. And I don't think that's the right approach because I think we need to stay engaged. We need to hold our public officials' feet to the fire, hold them accountable. But ultimately, voting is the way we shape our political systems. And this is a way to create a more just society. And that is really important. I liked what President Obama said this week in Pennsylvania when he said voting doesn't make things perfect, but it can make things better. And I think it's really important. Michael Weir talks about politics as a way of loving your neighbor. And I think that's the way that we can view voting, that it is important. It does matter. We are creating the systems that end up deciding who has access to healthcare, decide who has certain rights. And that's really important. And Pete Wehner says politics is about justice and justice always matters as sort of his attempt to get us not to be cynical. And I think it's important for all of us to think, what are our values? What's the society that we want to make? And there's things we have to do in our personal lives to live up to that. But voting is a part of our sort of collective effort that I think is really important.
Oh, so absolutely true. Okay, so you've talked a little bit about the work that you do brings in and religious leaders. So last month you wrote an article that we just thought was wonderful about the roles that religious leaders play to address the challenges that we'll face this election. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about that article, what inspired you to write it, and maybe a little bit about the feedback you've received for that article.
Yeah, what was important to me in writing that article is I feel like there's a lot of religious leaders around this time of year that are under enormous strain and pressure, especially if they're leading divided congregations, because they're feeling pulled to the left and to the right. And they have people like, just look at the Catholic Bishops' Conference's Twitter feed. Every time they tweet, no matter what it is, people are on them from both sides. But I also think there's a lot of religious leaders who are looking at our election and looking at the difficulty of voting during the pandemic, looking at some of the different things that have been said about whether we can trust voting. And I think that they do feel a need to support our democracy, support our election systems, but there aren't a lot of people meeting them where they are and saying, here are the ways that you can take part in a nonpartisan way. There are also efforts all over the political spectrum of people doing it within an ideological perspective, which is great too, but this is a way that I thought that I could be helpful. So the first thing is that religious leaders obviously have a great deal of reach within their communities. And because of the pandemic, there's a lot of pieces of our election system that need more people. So, for example, most people working at the polls in elections are over the age of 60, and it's not safe for older Americans to be in an environment like the polls. And so early this year, there were huge shortages across the country. And there was really a moment of panic because if you don't have the poll workers to work the polls, you're shutting down polling locations. It hurts people's access to vote. So Power the Polls is an organization that did a whole campaign just around signing people up at the polls. And that was one way that I've seen a lot of faith leaders partnering with them and trying to get people to work at the polls, and they've signed up over 600,000 people now to work at the polls and really eliminated some of the shortfalls, not everywhere, but really made a big effort. So that's one thing. There's a lot of civic efforts such as that. Vote Early Day is tomorrow, and there's religious partners that we've connected to that effort. That will keep the lines down on election day. It helps people not have obstacles on election day if you vote early. So that's been one piece of it, is connecting the good civic groups with faith leaders who are looking for a nonpartisan way to take action. The other thing that I think is really valuable is the way that faith leaders are still among some of the most trusted leaders in their community. And when we face so many challenges in this election for getting good information, not just because there's a lot of disinformation, but just there's a lot of challenges with trying to think through making sure you are asking for your ballot on time, filling it out correctly, getting it in time. And a lot of leaders are worried about misinformation. And what I keep telling them is the best way to fight misinformation is to help people know where to look for trusted information. And so to the extent that religious leaders can share with their communities their local election websites, where to look for election results that they can trust and projections that they can trust, they can use their power as trusted people in their communities to share good information, push back on things that are fake. And also, because of that credibility and that nonpartisanship, help hold our communities together, which again is something that you all are focused on at One America. But a really important piece that I wanted to mention beyond it just being about the election system itself is that our faith communities have the tools to bring people together across their differences, to speak from a perspective that's outside of our political parties. And I think that's a really important role for faith leaders to play in keeping the peace, in holding things together, and also with their experience leading people in a community that has political divisions. I think they have the skill set and credibility to lead on that front.
Oh, they absolutely do. And all of that advice is really, really fantastic. If you are a faith leader and you're catching this video, the link to Chris's article is in the comments. I highly recommend you read it and you share it with anybody who might be leading a congregation during these times, because it's stressful. It's a hard time to be a leader, especially in these diverse communities. So you've talked a little bit about this, you've touched on it, but how has faith, and your faith in particular, informed these decisions, these political choices that you make and have made in the past, both at the polls and in your work? You're highly engaged. How does your faith play into that?
Sure. Like millions of Americans, my faith is very important to me. It's at the center of my life. and I happen to be Catholic. So we also are blessed with this rich resource of Catholic social teaching that helps to inform our political engagement. And I would say that my political engagement is always through that sort of pro-life view focused on human dignity, the belief that every single person is made in the image and likeness of God and that their life has value. And this manifests itself across policy issues. Obviously the pro-life issue itself, but also caring for people who are in need, welcoming refugees and immigrants, opposing the death penalty, caring for our environment. So most of my politics comes down to what allows people to reach their God-given potential. And what I've loved about this election year in particular is that usually I'm active on individual issues because, like I said, I don't feel comfortable in either political party anymore. But being able to translate this feeling of everyone being made in the image and likeness of God, everyone should have access to our systems of government, translating that into a voter-focused and election-focused message has been really interesting and just really fulfilling for me to be able to say part of being able to live out your full potential as a human in this country is access to voting. That's an important part of living in the United States, and everyone who's eligible should have access to that. And so that's been just a really interesting piece of being able to translate my faith approach into this message of every person matters, so every person's voice should be heard, every vote should be counted. Which is a line from some of the other faith partners that we have.
Right. I mean, it's a beautiful message, and it's a beautiful gift to be able to have for yourself to take these beliefs and to take action on them, especially in this season. I think that there are a lot of people in our country who are feeling really out of control and are having a hard time figuring out how to engage. So do you have any advice for those people who might be watching this process play out and like you, maybe they don't find a home in either one of these opposing teams that we've got going on, but want to be engaged and to make a difference in this moment?
Absolutely. I think each person should think about what they care about and what their skills are and how they can be involved. And I think we can feel disenfranchised by our political options, but your identity is not tied to who you voted for. Someone has said, God isn't surprised by when you go into the voting booth. He knows what your options are. So I think vote no matter what, discern who you should be voting for, make your plan to vote. I think that's really important. But then figuring out what's important to you. How do you want to build a better society? And what are your ways to do that through politics and through your personal life? And it can be difficult to say, well, I'm politically homeless, I don't know where to go. But I think like John Carr at Georgetown talks about, for politically homeless people, the first thing we do is to build shelters. We need to build shelters where we can get active. And even for people who are within political parties but don't quite feel at home there, finding ways to be in your political party but challenging it where you need to. The AND campaign, Justin Giboney talks about this a lot. Even if you're within a political party, how can you help that party be better, serve the common good more fully, I think is really important. And then I do think it's a call for all of us to advocate for the right to vote, access to voting, and for our democracy. No matter what issue you care about, every freedom that we cherish, including our religious freedom, depends on free and fair and trusted elections and a functioning democracy. And I think there's a tendency too often to see protecting voting rights and our democracy as a left-wing thing or as a progressive thing. And I don't think conservatives should concede that, for starters, but I also think it's something that all of us are called to, especially at this moment where we're facing so many challenges. Advocating for everyone's right to vote and that every vote should be counted is something that every single person should care about, no matter what your political beliefs are.
Absolutely. The process itself matters. Our country is built on this process that we have. So we want everybody to vote. And even if your vote is different than my vote, we should all get out and we should make our voices heard and make sure that everybody in our networks, our family, our friends, our neighbors have that opportunity as well. So thank you so much for bringing that message to our show today. So we're running a little low on time, but we always like to end our Candid Conversations on a high note. Today, our country feels hard, it feels divided, but we all have something in our hearts. We have a vision and a hope. So with this election looming and the uncertainty that we're facing right now, what is your vision and your hope for our country's future?
Sure. I think in order to answer that, we should go back to the beginning. I'm going to promote a book here that I love, Our Declaration. It was behind me. It's a great book about the drafting process of the Declaration of Independence. And so what I want to say is that I read the ideals set forth in the Declaration of Independence and many of our founding documents, and I see a set of ideals that we're called to strive toward. And the founding generation was far from those ideals.
We may be experiencing a little bit technical glitch, so if you are still here, bear with us a minute and we'll try and get this resolved for us. All right, y'all. I don't know if y'all see what I see. So Facebook Live sometimes has a little bit of a glitch, and it looks like we might have lost Chris Crawford here. But we do want to thank him so much for joining us. I hope you check out the book that he was sharing there. He also is doing a lot of great work through the Democracy Fund and also through the group Faith and Election. So if you are online today, check him out. Look for him at the Democracy Fund and faithandelections.com, where you can read up on the work that they're doing over there. And as we gear up into this election, we hope that you make a plan to vote. If you have an opportunity to vote early, do so. Reach out to your friends, your neighbors, your family, and help them find a plan to vote as well. And whoever you are, just remember that this process matters and our democracy matters. We've got Chris back, so I will let him sign us off here. I was sharing about faith and elections and the work you're doing at the Democracy Fund, so we'll let you take it away, Chris.
Thank you. Sorry about that. My internet crashed, so I'm on my phone now. What I wanted to say is, I don't know when you lost me, but basically every generation has brought us closer to the ideals in the Declaration of Independence, as poorly as we have lived up to it. But I think that's something that is still ingrained in what we are all committed to. And so I still have hope in that. I still think that we are in a position where we can do that. And that we all should be committed to making this a more perfect union, and everybody should be finding what ways they can contribute to that in their communities, in their individual work, but also building our political systems that are more inclusive and more just. And go out, vote, make your plan to vote, make sure you vote, bring people with you. That's my high note to close on. And thank you very much. This has been really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And Chris said it best, go out to vote. You can find us at theoneamericamovement.org. Right now, we are working hard to rebuild our country through this period of challenge between the pandemic and this election cycle. We all need to come together, whoever you are, across divides. So please join us at www.coronarebuild.org. We can get you set up with great resources to talk to people who think, vote, and believe differently than you, and get you plugged into some programs that can do some hands-on work to build your community. Thanks again, Chris, and thank you everybody for joining us.